morning, guys. Today our topic is congenital anomalies in newborns. These are the birth defects. We also can call them as, yeah, also known as birth defects or congenital malformations or congenital disorders. These can be defined as structural functional anomalies that occur during intrauterine life. Whatever these abnormalities, they happen when the baby is in the mother's womb itself. Before the baby comes to the life outside, like baby takes birth, these abnormalities develop in the baby. These are known as congenital anomalies. These congenital conditions may be identified before or at the time of birth or later in the life. Before birth, also few with this ultrasound, antenatal ultrasounds, we can identify many of these congenital anomalies. Few we can observe, like very obvious congenital anomalies, we can observe them at birth, and few may present in the later in the life. Estimated like 6% of babies worldwide are born with congenital anomalies. Some congenital anomalies can be treated with surgical or non-surgical options, such as cleft lip and palate, clubfoot hernia. These things can be corrected. Like if in timely intervened, we can correct these things. Other include heart defects and neural tube defect, Down syndrome. These can have lifelong impacts on the newborns. And congenital anomalies are one of the main causes of global burden of disease. And low and middle income countries are disproportionately affected. So the main one of the main reason why this why we are talking about congenital anomalies are because the disease burden is much large. If you compare with other diseases, the overall disease burden is very large, and many of these congenital anomalies we can prevent them or we can treat them if you intervene in timely manner. In low and middle income countries, this disproportionately affected compared to developed countries, because in developed countries there are a lot of precautions they take to prevent this from occurring in first place. Secondly, if they occur, they terminate the pregnancy early, or they do timely intervention and correct them, so they increase the quality of life of these children. So it is in developed countries the incidence is low and the outcome is good, and their life like quality of life is good in these children. Whereas in low and middle income countries with less preventive measures, most of the mothers, they don't take the preventive measures, and they're antenatally not diagnosed in many of these cases, and postnatally they're not intervened in time. So these countries have a lot of burden of these congenital anomalies. So, to bring to everyone notice regarding the congenital, to bring awareness in the people about congenital anomalies, March 3rd is celebrated as World Birth Defects Day. Every year, March 3rd. I think from 2015 they are celebrating uh, congenital malformations day. I mean, World Birth Defects Day. I think so. See, because if you see in 2015, according to WHO, the census like around 3 lakh 3,000 children died because of congenital anomalies. Neonatal period, in the first 1 month of life, first 4 weeks of life, exactly telling 28 days. This is the total number of deaths in the newborn period. Out of them, 3 lakh people worldwide died because of congenital anomalies, and there are remaining many people who survived and whose quality of life is affected after that. And etiology, why congenital anomalies occur? 50% of the time we don't know why these congenitals can occur. Secondly, there can be any genetic defects, single gene defects, any mutation happening in the gene, mutations, deletions, insertions, anything can be there in single gene defect, or chromosomal disorders. Few chromosomal disorders like Down syndrome, Klinefelter, Edwards, these are chromosomal disorders that can happen. And multifactorial inheritance. Multifactorial inheritance means this is a like along with the genetic susceptibility. The baby should have the genes, but the genes generally won't like children having those genes won't present with those congenital anomalies. Everyone won't present unless they have a trigger. They have some insult which over that genetic mutation problems along with the insult they present with congenital anomalies. Sometimes environmental teratogens like heavy metals, pesticides can cause congenital anomalies. Like there are a lot of studies done in the agriculture, like rural side, where the few countries where they use high amount of pesticides in the rural side. They've studied, they've seen congenital malformations are high in those high in those children who are born in those communities, like agriculturally where they use high pesticides. And micronutrient deficiencies. When the mother won't take sufficient micronutrients, then she can give birth to baby with birth defects. Example, folic acid. When the mother don't take folic acid, the like the chance of giving birth to baby with neural tube defects is high. And then coming to consanguinity. Consanguinity is mostly common in this South Asian countries, especially South India. If you come to in India scenario, it is more in South India, and few in Muslim countries also it is common. Consanguinity. Consanguinity, there is increased risk of congenital anomalies, nearly doubles the risk of neonatal and early childhood deaths compared to the normal marriages. If you see in congenital marriages, there's a double the chance of neonatal and early childhood deaths, and the children can have intellectual disability and other health conditions also can be there in the children. And advanced maternal age, advanced with age, advanced aging of mother, there's increased risk of chromosomal abnormalities like Down syndrome. Some infections are known to cause increased rate of congenital anomalies, including Zika, syphilis, rubella. Recently Zika in around 2017, I think 16 or 17, the Zika virus, wherever areas, the areas of world where Zika virus um, epidemic happened, in those areas we would see like babies born with a lot of congenital anomalies, especially microcephaly, mental retardations, and all the things. Regarding syphilis and rubella, these cause long-term effects in the baby like congenital cataract and brain disorders in this, like calcification in the brains. These children can be um, developmentally abnormal. So, again, cystic fibrosis and hemophilia C are more prevalent in specific ethnic groups. Few ethnic groups, cystic fibrosis mostly seen in some few kinds of Jews, and the hemophilia, in the royal family of British royal family, we see that hemophilia. And prevention. How do we prevent these congenital malformations? Through removal of risk factors or reinforcing the protective factors. Either we have to remove risk factor which is causing the congenital anomalies, or we have to reinforce like those factors which protect us from developing these abnormalities. We have to reinforce them. Firstly, ensuring adolescent girls and mother have a healthy diet. First, adolescent girls and mothers. If mothers are healthy, healthy mothers, healthy babies. That's what we say. If mother is healthy, we get a healthy baby. So we should ensure that adolescent girls and mothers have a healthy diet. Next, folic acid in adolescent girls and mothers. Folic acid supplementation we give for most of like pre-pregnancy we have to give. It's not like after pregnancy. Most of the times, by the time we diagnose the mother with pregnancy, already neural tube development would have taken place, completed by the time. So there's no point of giving folic acid, much use of giving folic acid once the pregnancy is diagnosed. So pre-pregnancy you have to give. They say at least 3 months before planning pregnancy, but we don't know in uh, like in developing countries and all that we can't like exactly counsel the mothers and girls. So here we universally give folic acid to all adolescent girls and mothers who are of the childbearing age. And evidence of alcohol and tobacco. These two are known as like main teratogens. Out of all the habits, these two are very important teratogens. So we ask like counsel the adults and girls and mothers to avoid alcohol and tobacco, especially the childbearing age group. And evidence of travel to region experiencing outbreaks of infection associated known to be associated with congenital anomalies. Example Zika. And the like few areas in the world where Zika endemic is happening, that time like pandemic is happening, pandemic epidemic we can take. Epidemic is happening, then that time the pregnant childbearing age women are advised not to travel to those areas because like of them catching the virus and then transmitting like having the baby with congenital anomalies is high risk, high chance. So we advise them not to travel to those areas and reducing environmental exposure to hazardous substances. Here hazardous substances are like again heavy metals and pesticides. These are the two important environmental hazards that cause congenital malformations. And controlling diabetes. Most of these adolescent girls we have to educate them, counsel them, regularly check them for diabetes, and then if they have any diabetes, we have to tell them dietary control, and then again, if required, we have to give medications because we know diabetes causes a lot of congenital like lot of abnormalities, malformations in the newborn. If the mother is a diabetic mother, the baby can be macrosomal type. Like first, the big babies can be born, and baby can have anorectal malformations, cardiac malformations. There are a lot of problems with these babies. So controlling diabetes in mm, antenatal period in mothers is very important, and reducing exposure to medications or medical radiations. Generally, pregnant women, we don't give early medications. Every time we have to cross check whether this medication can be given in pregnancy or not. Unnecessarily, we don't give. If you're giving any medication, we have to weigh like pros and cons. Like if you give them medication, what are the benefits? If you give them medication, what are the negative effects? We have to weigh which is go like high, and we have to choose the medications in that way. And radiation, and most of the pregnant women, we avoid medical radiation. Example, X-rays, CT scan, PET, and all these things. They have high radiation, so we generally avoid them unless it is like very much required. Only then we have to give. Generally, we completely avoid most of the times. And then vaccinations. Vaccination is also very important in this age group. India has taken that MR vaccination. If you remember, like some 3 years back, it has taken MR vaccine campaign, where like all adolescent girls, like school going children, especially adolescent girls, are targeted to give vaccination, MR vaccination, like for measles and rubella, because this rubella is one of the important cause for congenital anomalies, like risk for congenital anomalies in the newborn. So we vaccine all the mother, like child, before mother goes into childbearing age. And screening for infections. Most of the times when a mother comes, if she's, if we think she's coming from high risk places, or when where there is a high chance prevalence of these diseases, or when the previous pregnancy, if she has some abnormalities in the previous child, we screen the mother for torch infections. Torch infections, we know all those toxoplasmosis, um, syphilis, rubella, and all these things. And then these are the preventive measures. And like detection, when how we detect, like early detection and early treatment. I told you, like early detection are like when to terminate pregnancy, all these things is uh, all these things comes also like take place, like the ways to reduce these anomalies. And preconception screening. Preconception screening, like this screening happens even before the mother conceives baby, to identify like those at risk passing a disorder into their children. In few families, we know like few diseases run in few families, few neural abnormal, few like chromosomal abnormalities which causes this neuronal damages, or like mental retardation, and few things like where like we can screen the family. If one family member is involved with like sickle cell, we will screen the like next generation, like siblings also, before they conceive. We'll check whether they have any sickle cell trait, like I mean, or thalassemia trait. If both husband and wife, they both have thalassemia trait, the high chance of having a baby with thalassemia major, which is major disability. So this antenatal screening is very important, like preconception screening, this we call preconception screening. In muscular dystrophies, if a sibling of a, if a brother, like if this is one adolescent girl whose brother is having muscular dystrophy, like this muscular dystrophy, we'll screen for her, because she may not have muscular dystrophy, but there high chance of her children having muscular dystrophy. So we screen her for the genes. If she has the genes, we'll counsel them, prepare them for that chances, so that we can do antenatal screening, and if required, we can terminate the pregnancy. So preconception screening is important. Then periconception screening. This is around the age of conception we screen. Screening of young women or advanced maternal age. When the mother is advanced maternal age, we know high chances of genetic abnormalities like Down syndrome and all this. So we screen them, and we'll screen the. This is for use of alcohol, tobacco, or other risk factors. If they're using alcohol or tobacco, the high chances I told having the baby having a congenital malformation. So we screen them for these things. And ultrasound screening for Down syndrome and major sexual abnormality during first trimester, and for severe fetal anomalies during second trimester. Ultrasound screening for Downs, especially like when you are expecting like mothers high like advanced metal laser something, we screen for Downs, ultrasound only, and for other such abnormalities. Now they do fetal echocardiogram also. Like with the baby inside the mother, we screen the for congenital cardiac abnormalities in the baby. That is fetal echocardiogram we do, and we know a lot of these things. Any amniotic bands, any malformations, spina bifida, any neural tube defects, anything we can, all of this we can find antenatally by ultrasound scanning. And sometimes maternal blood can be used for screening. Like few markers, if you see in the blood, mother's blood, take sample and see few markers elevated in this mother blood, we can think of few syndromes like in Down syndrome, the ACC can be elevated, and few like neural tube defects and all that alpha fetoprotein is elevated in the mother. Sometimes we take free fetal DNA. Free fetal DNA is some DNA of fetus can escape into mother's blood. We can get the fetal DNA from mother's blood instead of getting direct going into that fetus. For the mother's blood, we can take the fetal DNA and we can screen the chromosomal abnormalities. We can do chromosome mapping and see any chromosomal defects in the baby. These are the periconceptional screenings. And neonatal screening. Once the baby is born, now the baby is born, what you have to do? You have to clinically examine any abnormalities in the baby, any head abnormalities, size in the head, like shape, size, anything, or any spinal abnormalities, spina bifida, or meningomyelin wheel, or any umbilical hernia, anything, any limb deformity, club foot, club hand, all these things we can find out by clinical examination. And then screening for disorders of blood, metabolism, hormone productions. In most of the higher centers now, most of the corporate sectors, they do all this screening, blood screening for metabolism and hormone productions. They have like a panel of diseases. They use spectroscopy and they do screening for all these things. Hormones like thyroid hormone, which is very important. They screen for thyroid hormone. In metabolism, they see for glucose 6PD deficiencies, any other thing. And blood, they look for thalassemia, sickle cell anemia, all these screenings they do at birth. And screening for deafness and heart diseases. For deafness, we do like we tell otoacoustic emissions. We do like OA emission. We know like whether the baby hearing is good or not. At the initial screening, we can do. If you have any doubt, then we go for BERA, SERA, and a lot of other things are there. And heart defects, echocardiogram, X-ray. All this helps in newborn screening for heart diseases. We do early screening. If you identify these things early, if you intervene early, we'll increase the better outcome. Like the less chance of baby dying in the neonatal period, or like post. Like if you see clubfoot, most of these things, if you manipulate the foot within the first 1 year, the high chances of becoming normal foot. The baby can walk normally instead of without needing any surgery or anything. If you leave that thing, maybe sometimes surgery may be required, and sometimes even without surgery also baby may not be walking normally. So neonatal screening is very important. And then coming to individual congenital malformations, there are a lot of congenital malformations. We can tell like from some thousands of congenital malformations, head to toe. You tell an organ, there is a congenital malformation for it. Right from eyes, nose, tongue, also microglossia, brain. Brain can be like any Allard challenge malformations or anencephaly. There are a lot of things actually in brain. And then coming to trachea, esophagus, thyroid, lung deformities, diaphragm, heart, stomach, intestine, liver, urinary tract, like from kidney, ureters, urinary bladder, everywhere, like limbs, whatever your organ you say, they can have a abnormalities. But here, like I touched upon, like most common congenital anomalies, especially what they ask you, what they may ask for you, the small congenital anomalies. Simple ones I touched. Like first one is tracheoesophageal fistula. Tracheoesophageal fistula, there is a fistula, there is a connection between trachea and esophagus. Generally, like if you see that nasopharynx, oropharynx, they join and then at the same place, and after that they separate into trachea and esophagus, and after that they don't have any connection. Generally, they are like patent. Like trachea is for air movement into the lungs, and esophagus takes food and water into the stomach. So if there is any mixing after this point, the air can enter into the stomach, and the like esophageal contents, food can enter into, food and water can enter into lungs. The problem with food and water entering into lungs is it can cause pneumonia and other things. Baby can have asphyxia and death also, immediate death also can happen. Sometimes these fistulas, they can be blind loops, like where they won't enter into other things, they just end up like there's no connection with anything. So those we call it as the bind loops. I'll tell you like the types. The basic thing is tracheoesophageal fistula, the connection between trachea and esophagus. The anomaly. These are known as tracheoesophageal fistulas. See what happens with the upper part of esophagus is from retropharyngeal segment. Um, upper part of the esophagus develops from the retropharyngeal segment. At 4 weeks of gestation, the laryngotracheal groove is formed. Trachea starts separating only at 4 weeks of gestation. Later, two longitudinal furrows develop to separate the respiratory primordium from esophagus. Deviation and alterations, altered cell growth in the septum results in formation of tracheoesophageal fistula. Like see, these trachea and esophageal fistula, why they develop in the first place? Because trachea and esophagus develops from the same tube. If you see the tube, retropharyngeal segment, like from the retropharyngeal segment, from there the both respiratory, like trachea and esophagus, they develop together as a single tube. They develop, and then the groove appears between them, and that groove separates. That the grooves they grow in as a septum, and they separate into trachea and esophagus. If you see in the picture, you will know the ridges, and they develop and they separate into trachea and esophagus. Any problem in this separation, that can lead to a abnormality, like tracheoesophageal fistula, like the persistence of opening between the esophagus and trachea happens if any abnormality during this period of embryogenesis. How these babies present? Tracheoesophageal fistula, these antenatally there is a, like we can't diagnose them. Mostly they manifest only after birth. Like mostly when we can suspect is like when mother has maternal polyhydramnios or single umbilical artery in the baby after birth. If you see these two things, then we can suspect any atresia in the upper digestive system. We can think of esophageal atresia also. Any anomalies in the vertebra, anorectal region, heart, kidney, limbs, this also should raise a suspicion. Like these associated anomalies, most of these congenital anomalies are associated with one another. Like if one anomaly is present, we have to look for other associated anomalies, because they come in a groups most of the time. So we have to look for them. Not most of the time. Most of the time they'll be like present individually, but sometimes they present as a group of anomalies. So we have to look for other anomalies also. Like when we find any vertebral, anorectal, or heart, kidney, or limb anomalies, we should look for esophageal fistula also. Newborns, generally these babies they present with excessive drooling soon after birth with frothy, like drooling will be there with frothiness. So the air and whatever saliva mix-ups, they come out as this drooling, frothy saliva. Frothy because like the air from lungs is mixed into. Like most of the time, this saliva is supposed to drain into esophagus, but what happens is it drains into trachea here. So in trachea, it mixes with air and comes out to the mouth. So there will be frothing of the saliva. And they can be choking at cyanosis on feeds. If you start feeding these children, they can start choking at cyanosis. Like they won't be able to breathe. Suddenly they can collapse and they can die also immediately if you give like too much of food at a time in these babies. And can cause aspiration pneumonia. When these food particles enters into the lungs, that can cause pneumonia in the baby. Diagnosis. Diagnosis is simply first we'll pass a stiff rubber catheter. Try to pass into the esophagus. We'll, like nasogastric tube or orogastric tube, will try to pass. Mostly it won't pass up to the stomach. Generally arrests at the 7 to 8 centimeters from the mouth. Normally it goes to stomach, but here we will be unable to push it. Generally from lateral view, like after inserting, we'll take an X-ray, see like to which part it is going. Sometimes it will take a U-turn and enter into the mouth. The tube will come back into the mouth. Sometimes it will enter into the lungs. So we'll know like where that tube is going if you take an X-ray after inserting the tube. Sometimes, like most of the times now we go for CT. CT gives more precise because like exactly where the defect, how it goes, most of the things we'll know by CT. If you see, there are types. This is the esophagus first one that striped tube. Second one with horizontal lines, that is trachea. See, these normally trachea and esophagus is separate. Normal. First one is normal. First pick. Second pick, there is like see the esophagus. It is ending in a blind loop, and the lower part of the esophagus connecting the trachea. This is the most common type abnormality. 80% of tracheoesophageal fistula are this type A. This one where like upper end ends in a blind loop and lower end of stomach ends like opens into the trachea. Here the tube, if you pass a tube, is a blind loop, so it enters and takes a U-turn and comes back into the mouth. And second type is like where the lower part, upper part are not connected. There is some band-like thing connected, but the lumen won't be connecting upper and lower part of the esophagus here. These are about 8% of the chances. And third one is where trachea, esophagus both are developed, but there is a communication between them. This is we call H type of tracheoesophageal fistula. And fourth one is where upper part, lower part of esophagus opens separately into the trachea. This is also a modification of H type kind of thing. And last one is where lower part is blind, upper part of the esophagus opens into the trachea. All these possibilities can happen, but most common is the first one, like esophagus ending in the blind loop and lower part of the esophagus opening into the trachea. With the H type, the problem is if H type, if whatever I told, like if you see from the top, like lower down left one, if you see that esophagus trachea separate, there is a connection between them. In these times, most of the children, they sometimes if the connection is very small, or like sometimes they can be like act like a valve also. Sometimes they won't allow, but rarely they allow the food. These children can present laterly. Other all they present immediately after birth, but this type can be missed at birth. They may present later age of the birth with recurrent pneumonias, recurrent infections of the lung infections, recurrent whatever cough, chronic cough, and all that. So there's high chance of missing these at birth. But other things, most of the other type of trapezoidal fistula are identified right at the birth. And treatment. Most of these trapezoidal fistulas, they have the difficulty in feeding. Firstly, the baby may be severely dehydrated. So we have to give a fluid correction to the baby. If any electrolyte abnormalities also, you have to correct the electrolyte abnormalities in the baby. And already the mother, like baby, like they would have attempted giving feeds to the baby. So some feeds would have entered into the lungs. So already the baby would have developed pneumonia or like in the process of developing pneumonia. So we have to control infections in these babies. So we have to start immediately antibiotics for these babies to prevent infections. Then go for surgical corrections. Surgical corrections should be given as soon as possible. Like like the sooner you correct, the sooner the better is the outcome in these babies. So surgical correction is the definitive treatment here. This is a tracheoesophageal fistula, like first time I'm going through. After tracheoesophageal fistula, then we talk about anorectal malformations. Anorectal malformation is generally from colon, the rectum comes after rectum opens into anus. There is a no proper communication between rectum and anus. There is no like opening from the rectum to anus. So the baby can't pass the feces. This is the anorectal malformation basically. Malformation also called as imperforate anus. Anus is not perforated, like there is a miscommunication, like there is no complete communication between the rectum and anus. This occurs when rectum does not come through the tissues of the bottom, leaving no opening for passing stools. And anatomically classified, like if you see most of the newborns, a baby is immediately born, we have to do clinical examination. In this is one part, we have to look for the anal opening. Some few people, like old people, they do pass a catheter also and see like whether it is entering or not. One thing is, if baby has passed meconium, that is good. Like there is no anorectal malformation. If baby has not passed meconium after 24 hours also, then we have to look for any anorectal malformation, because like there would have been any gap, so the baby is not passing meconium. That can be the reason. And next, anatomically, this anorectal malformation is classified as high, intermediate, low, and the level of the rectum, the gap between the anus and the rectum, if it is very high, intermediate, and low. I'll tell you like how do we classify intermediate, high, low, and then position is determined. This position of the rectum opening is determined by a relation of terminal part of the bowel to the Pubis puborectalis sling. Compare with the puborectalis sling. Puborectalis sling is around the anus. So from there, how far it is, that determines the level classification. Most high and intermittent lesions are more common in females. Low can be like very easy to treat, but the high and intermediate lesions are very little difficult to treat. And next, like what you do in this children when you suspect this children, X-ray. X-ray film of abdomen is obtained 12 to 24 hours after birth, with the baby being kept in inverted position. Baby is kept upside down and an X-ray is taken. We'll wait for 12 to 14 hours because we'll wait for the gas. Like once the baby starts crying, it will swallow the air. So we'll wait the air to pass up to the rectum and then take an X-ray, but putting the baby upside down, so that we'll know like upside down we put because like air tends to move up. So when put the baby upside down, this whatever gas shadow is there in the rectum, we can see like we'll be going up upside. We will know the what are like uh, the lowest part of the rectum. We can know by this way. And generally, what they do is they put a coin on the anus place and they take a X-ray, so they know from the coin how far is the gas shadow is there. Generally, we prefer lateral picture of pelvis should be obtained to define whether the rectal pouch is above or below a line drawn from pubis and coccyx. We generally do CP line. Coccyx to pubis, we draw a line and we'll see whether this shadow is below or above this line. So here are the low anomalies. Low anomalies, if you see baby is inverted and the bright point at the anus is like they put a coin there and they take an X-ray. They see, if you see the air shadow is almost reaching the coin. These are low anomalies. Sometimes they can be simple imperforate anus with a small membrane which is obstructing. There, when you just do a digital examination or when you perforate it, the stool comes out. Those are low level. Sometimes they can be skin fold where the resection is very easy, and sometimes they can be like little more tissues where the surgery is required. Low anomalies. And then intermediate and high anomalies. CP line is pubis to coccyx. We draw a line. If it is gas shadow is below it, it is intermittent. If it is above it, it is high. Then one more is ischial line. Ischial tuberosity will draw a line. If below that line, it is low. Above that line, it is intermittent. So these two lines are important: ischial line, pubococcygeal line. Then actually, if you see like if you don't get an X-ray, you can see here that two lines, pubic to coccygeus will draw a line. If above that line, it is high anomaly. Gas bubble, if it is above it, it is high anomaly. If it is below it, but in between CP line and I line, I is scale line. If it is between that, that is intermittent. If gas shadow is below scale line, that is low anomaly. So treatment is surgical correction. Surgical correction is a definitive correction, but what the temporary colostomy will be performed if it is a high anomaly or intermittent anomaly, or like when low anomaly also, where the surgery is like depending on the surgeon. Like when he's doing surgery, if you know like we can like open the anus immediately, or sometimes if it needs healing and all that, they do temporary colostomy. Temporary colostomy is like the colon is opened into the anterior abdominal wall, so that feces is passed from anterior abdominal wall, and this area, whatever restructures they have done, like correction they have done, they will let it heal. Until that healing time, they will leave the colostomy open. Like once the lower anal region heals, then they will close the colostomy, and then resurgery they will do, and the baby can pass stools normally through the anus. Generally, prognosis is better in low defects. Low defects is almost like near the anus, so there is a small gap which can be easily covered. Like about 80 to 90% patients become continent after surgeries for low defects. 80 to 90% success rate will be there in these children. In two-thirds of the children with high defects, there is incontinency. If the high defects, the outcome will be very bad. About two-thirds children they won't have stool incontinency. Like they will be passing whenever it comes. Like they won't be able to store it, keep it, and pass whenever they want. The difficulty will be there with high defects. So outcome is not so good with high defects. These are the anatomical malformations. Next, coming to neural tube defects. Neural tube defects. These are like there's a lot of types in neural tube defects, and this one of the main thing for neural tube defects is folic acid. Folic acid deficiency is implicated in the neural tube defects. This is a severe birth defect in brain and spinal cord, like spinal cord occurs when the neural tube does not close properly. Neural tube initially it forms as a, like if you do normal embryology, it forms as a open C type of thing, loop kind of thing when it closes. When the problem with the closing of the neural tube, these anomalies will happen. Neural tube forms the, like from neural tube only, like brain and spine forms. So any defect in this thing, they can have abnormalities in brain and spine. These types of birth defects develop very early during pregnancy. Like neural tube forms very early in the pregnancy. So often, like before the woman knows she is pregnant, the neural tube would have already formed. So like giving folic acid after pregnancy may not be so useful. So we have to plan before. Like if someone is planning for pregnancy, we should start giving them folic acid, 400 micrograms daily, at least for 3 months before conception. If the planning, like at least before 3 months, we have to start giving folic acid. Generally, what we do is we do for all reproductive age women 400 mg micrograms daily to prevent neural tube defects. This folic acid should be above the what are normal, what they are taking with the daily food, fresh fruits and vegetables they will be taking. This should be above that. And then the two most common types of neural tube defects are, first is spina bifida, second one is anencephaly. Anencephaly, the brain is completely open here. It is not compatible with life, anencephaly. Spinal bifida, like few spinal bifida, depending on the degree of involvement, they may survive, they can have a better outcome. But few babies with a very severe spinal bifida, that whatever the below the level of lesion, the baby will be paralyzed. This is another type of neural tube defect. This is anencephaly. Anencephaly, where the contents of the brain are along with meninges, or sometimes only meninges comes out of the brain and form a sac outside. Like brain or its covering herniate through a defect in skull. This is a defect in skull, where that if neural tube is not closing towards properly towards the brain side, this defect can happen. Anencephaly, encephalocele, encephalocele, encephalocele. So these are the three most common types of neural tube defects. Neural tube defects, main thing I have to remember is folic acid. Folic acid prevents neural tube defects. Generally, we give 400 micrograms folic acid, but if a mother is given a birth to a baby with neural tube defect first pregnancy, second pregnancy we give 10 times this to this. That is 4 mg we give about 4 milligrams of folic acid every day we give for those mothers. And next thing is cleft lip and cleft palate. Most of this cleft palate is the first picture, where the baby from outside looks very normal, but inside if you see, open the mouth and see, there is a cleft in the palate. And some, if it's cleft lip, only outside we can directly from outside we can see, but sometimes the cleft lip and palate can be together. If the picture, if you see, the palate is also not completely closed and lip also not closed. This is cleft lip and cleft palate together. Cleft lip is recognized readily, and by careful inspection of oral cavity is necessary to identify cleft palate. For cleft palate, we have to see all newborn babies at time of birth. We have to open their mouth and see whether they have cleft palate or not. This is important because if the baby has a cleft palate at birth, the baby have a lot of difficulties in feeding. Sometimes they can aspirate. I mean, the feeds can enter into the lungs and then cause pneumonia, sometimes death also. So we should be very careful at time of the birth. At the time of the birth, we should look for these defects. Sometimes cleft of soft palate can be easily missed. If you see the palate, the initial part of palate is hard palate, and soft palate is towards the lower part, towards the like inside part, which can be sometimes the tongue can be obscuring the vision of low soft palate. So we have to depress the tongue and see. So sometimes we can easily miss soft palate. Sometimes there can be submucosal cleft, like mucus is covered outside normally, but the cleft will be there inside this, especially the bony defects. There generally we have to keep our finger into the baby's mouth and then palpate for any cleft in the palate. And along with this cleft, when you see a baby with cleft lip and palate, we should look for any ventricular septal defect. They can be associated. Like few babies with cleft palate can have an associated ventricular septal defect, heart defect. So we should get an echocardiogram in these babies and look for any cardiac abnormalities, associated cardiac abnormalities. Feeding of this baby with cleft palate, cleft lip is okay. Like feeding won't be much problem. We can do surgery as soon as possible. Like by around 6 months of age, we can do surgery by baby when baby reaches 6 months of age. For cleft palate, we'll wait up to 1 year. Around 1 to 1.5 years, we'll do for cleft palate. The problem with cleft palate is there's a lot of feeding difficulty in this baby with cleft palate. I told you they can aspirate the feeds and all that. They need a special bottle. Like see, if you see, they can use spoon feeding or palliative feeding. If not, bottle feeding can be tried with a soft nipple and rubber flank. The flank should be rubber flank should be very this thing. This what happened is this rubber flank, whatever there, it goes and um, pushes against the cleft and closes the cleft, so the baby can suckle normally, like normal baby. So these bottles can be used. Um, if these feeding methods are not successful, we can do palatal process can be used. Like the palatal process, they close the palatal cleft for some time, so the baby can feed normally. Surgery is a definitive treatment. Generally, cleft, I told you, cleft palate we do around 1 year of age. Cleft lip we do around 6 months. First we cut the lip, then we cut the palate. The baby has together lip, cleft lip and palate. Then coming to diaphragmatic hernia. Diaphragmatic hernia. Diaphragmatic hernia, we know diaphragm separates abdomen from thorax. From chest to the tummy. Like it is between lungs on the upper part of the diaphragm, lungs and heart are the up on above the diaphragm. Below the diaphragm, you can see right side we see liver and then stomach and spleen. So these two, abdominal cavity and thoracic cavity, are separated by diaphragm. So when there is a defect in this diaphragm, what happens is the abdominal contents goes into the thorax. There is a problem with diaphragmatic hernia. What happens is, see, diaphragmatic hernia occurs because the failure of closure of the parieto-pleural membrane. We know the peritoneum, pleural peritoneum and pleural peritoneum, which if it fails to close, then there's an opening. That is diaphragmatic hernia. This allows intestinal loops to ascend into the thorax and compress the developing lungs, can result in pulmonary hypoplasia. See, it depends upon when the diaphragmatic hernia has happened. If it is early in the embryogenesis, the intestine would have gone up very early into the chest. So there is no space for the lungs to develop. They become very hypoplasic. So once the baby is born, they have breathing difficulty because lung is not developed. If you do surgery also, the outcome may not be good. But in the late embryogenesis, if the defect, the intestine starts going into the chest, then lungs would have got developed somewhat. So when you place it, pull the intestine back into the abdomen and close the diaphragm, the outcome is a little better. These babies can present anytime. Like generally, most of these diaphragmatic hernia they present at birth. It is a medical emergency. We have to intervene immediately for these diaphragmatic hernias. But few small diaphragmatic hernias can be missed and then present at the later time of life. But most of them presents at birth. It's a medical emergency, as I told you. The baby, if you see, the baby have desperate distress and scaphoid abdomen. Most of the diaphragmatic hernia they diagnose antenatally now. If it is very early, they're diagnosing, they just terminate the pregnancy. But if they missed in early pregnancy, if you know late, so what we do is like while the baby is like born, like during the delivery itself, we prepared for resuscitate these babies. We'll avoid the bag and mask ventilation of this baby. Directly, if the baby is born, we'll intubate the baby and connect to ventilator, and then we give nitrous oxygen and other things to decrease the pulmonary. Like these children can present with pulmonary hypertension also. So that's the management of treatment. Nowadays, they straight away intubate the baby as the baby is passing through the vaginal canal itself. They will start even without first breath itself. They will intubate these babies. And surgical repair after stabilization. Diaphragmatic hernia, the main thing is not surgery. First, we have to stabilize the baby. Baby should be stabilized first, then only the surgery. Stabilization means the baby should not have respiratory distress in these conditions. So, once the baby is stabilized, then only you can go for surgery. This is the diaphragmatic hernia. If you see the X-ray, you can see the intestinal loops entered into the chest in the first figure. Second thing, like this, the pictorial normal diaphragm will be there, separating thorax and abdomen. When there is a Defect in this, the intestine complete, sometimes liver also can enter into the chest and push the lungs and prevent it from developing. Next, there are a lot of congenital abdominal as I told you, but I will go through the pictures fast as soon as possible, like clearly. Next one is amniotic bands. Amniotic bands, that you see that amniotic membrane around the baby, sometimes they can form a loop over the limbs, especially upper limbs or lower limbs, and they can form the amniotic bands. So those defects will be there in the limbs. Sometimes amputation, complete limb amputation or digital amputation can also happen, like that what total nails everything. If the ambibags are too tight, the nails also can be like be like they fall off, like amputation happens, auto amputation happens in these things, amniotic bands. And then abdominal wall defects, anterior abdominal wall, you know that while developing intestine develops outside the body, and then it comes inside the body, but there is a defect in the abdominal wall, they like intestine will stay outside. There are two important abdominal wall defects. There is omphalocele and gastrochysis. Omphalocele is like the intestine would have come out through the umbilical cord. That is omphalocele. Like umbilical, through umbilical cord, inside the umbilical cord, the intestine is there. It's outside, but around it, umbilical cord is there, kind of thing. That is omphalocele. Gastrochysis, umbilical cord is separate. If you see that the umbilical cord is separate, the abdominal wall is itself is defect. So intestine comes from next to the umbilical cord. That is gastrochysis. And then congenital cardiac abnormalities. There are huge number of congenital cardiac abnormalities. We generally separate them as structural, conductive, and functional defects. Again, in structural, there are like cyanotic and acyanotic. Again, in cyanotic, there are like 5 types of categories. Normally, if you see structural abnormalities, there are septal defects, atrial septal defects, ventricular septal defects, and patent duct arteriosus. These are septal defects. And abnormal valves, any problem with the valves in the heart, cardiac, the stenosis, atresia, regurgitation we call. Anything can be there. Atrial stenosis, atrial regurgitation, atrial atresia, or like mitral stenosis, mitral atresia, regurgitation. Any valve can be involved. And Epstein's anomaly and complex is like when two three defects together they form complex congenital defects, that is tetralogy of Fallot, transposition of great arteries, total anomalies, pulmonary venous connection, all these are complex cardiac abnormalities. And conduction defects, conduct defects in the like the structurally heart is normal, but that electrical conductivity, you know, if you know to this conduction of electricity into the in the heart is defective here. Then few long QT syndromes where the QT interval is prolonged in these babies. And functional defects. Functional defects, where the structure kind of structurally normal, but the heart will have other problems like dilated cardiomyopathy. This is a big heart and restrictive, like sometimes erythemogenic right ventricular hyper. Bilateral two sides of nasal cavity are closed. These babies they present immediately after birth, where the baby tends to cry. If they cry, they'll be start taking air from mouth. But when they stop crying, they go into cyanosis, and then they can like cyanosis, and then bradycardia, everything will develop. Because like when they don't cry, there is no intake of air in these babies. When they cry, they tend to take through mouth. These coronary atresia can be again membranous or bony. Membranous, if you set up prick them, you can open them straight away. Bony means again you need surgery in this coronary atresia. Again, bilateral coronary atresia are present at birth. Unilateral can be missed at birth. They can present in the little age, like not immediately after birth. They can few days or few months after birth they can present unilateral, because still the air can go through one opening. And then congenital malformation of kidney right from malformations of kidney and like genital urinary system, right from kidney to the bladder. There can be lot of things, lot of anomalies. If first we talk about kidney renal agenesis can happen. Agenesis is complete absence. Renal, like kidney is formed but like it is disintegrated on its own, that is renal agenesis. And then ureteric malformations. Ureteric malformations is the urine whatever forms in the kidney is carried by ureter to the bladder. So that's ureter constriction can happen, or dilation, like any obstruction can happen. And duplex ureter, we can tell that we can need two ureters coming out of it, and all these are ureter anomalies. Sometimes these two kidneys are combined at the lower pole, that is horseshoe kidney. Sometimes it is hypo or dysplastic kidney, like kidney is smaller than what we normally expect, that is hypo or dysplastic kidney. Sometimes few congenital anomalies they can cause polycystic kidney. There will be cysts in the kidney. That is autosomal dominant, autosomal recessive. Generally, two types are there. Autosomal recessive is infantile type. At immediately in children, childhood period they present. Autosomal dominant they present in adolescence or adult age. There are two types of polycystic kidney. And then nephrolithiasis is stones in the kidney. These are all the abnormalities of kidney. And coming to clubfoot. Clubfoot is one of the congenital anomaly which can be easily treated if early diagnosed. Congenital clubfoot, you know that the deformity with the foot, there will be inward curving, like curving of the foot. This happens because of the pressure from the uterine when there's um, less volume of amniotic fluid or something. There's a lot of pressure on these links, and it is because of the physical thing. Physical compression of the foot. In the club foot, if you know, like early, diagnose early, and then if you intervene early in these babies, then no need of surgery. Like they can have a normal foot, and they can have lead a normal life. These babies. So club foot treatment generally goes around for 4 to 6 weeks. But serial casting, positive metrovital, the cast, like gradually we will change the shape of the foot by 5 stages. By 4 to 6 weeks, the foot can be normal. Thank you. I think there is like many many malformations. Had to do that many things. I could not cover everything in this class. Maybe like we'll be going classes we can know, but mostly we should know like what are the congenital anomalies and what are the general things, general concepts of congenital anomalies, like how to prevent them, how to diagnose them, what are the etiology, why they happen actually. The first thing actually I told you, congenital anomalies. We estimate 6% is what the world burden every year, like around 3 lakh people. You take 2015, 3 lakh children died in neonatal phase because of these anomalies, etiologies, why happens, infections, radiation, and all these things. And then prevention, how to prevent this, detection, how do we detect these things, and then coming to specific. Thank you. Any doubts you can ask me. Thank you. Hope people understood the class. Bye.